me because all children deserve to experience both the joy of reading and the skills in life that literacy brings. I am passionately committed to strengthening children's literacy through library services and community advocacy. NOLS Storytime specifically encourage parents and caregivers to engage in the 5 practices of early literacy, which is singing, talking, reading, writing, and playing. And also working with little people just fills my heart. So it gives me joy.
Thank you, Jennifer. Steve, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Steve Deutermann. I serve as Chief Volunteer Officer for the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Olympic Peninsula. And this subject is important to me because I have had the opportunity to see the results when it doesn't happen. I also serve as a guardian ad litem in the child advocate program for the court. I see there are a number of formerly known as CASA volunteers on this call, so good to see you all. And I've had the experience in the past year, which was totally unexpected, of having been an emergency foster placement for a 9 and 10-year-old pair of brothers coming out of domestic violence and substance use homes. So I've been getting educated, and the film was very useful in connecting the dots for me.
Steve, thank you so much for all that you do to volunteer in our community. Finally, can we please have Representative Mike Chapman introduce himself?
Hey everyone, it's Mike here. Glad to join into this conversation. The reason I think maybe why I'm involved is certainly the legislature has an important role to play, but also just with regards to our rural economy or just our economy at large, especially access to childcare consistently rates is one of the top concerns for business owners and parents, and is really seen in a rural community like we have. And so the legislature has been looking at that issue the last couple of sessions. We'll be looking at it again. We had some great legislation last year. I already saw there was a question. Maybe we'll talk about that. There was some great legislation last year that was introduced that would have created a dedicated funding source of about $1.2 billion over a biennium specifically. It didn't pass. If we hadn't had the COVID emergency, and we can talk about why it may be more difficult to pass now, but that's certainly something the legislatures wanted to look at, something I support. And the business community at large around this state, both large and small businesses. The number one, they say it's between that and workforce training are the 2 concerns they have with filling the workforce. And prior to COVID, we knew employers were were having a hard time filling jobs. And these were the two main concerns, was workforce training and access to childcare. We funded workforce training completely. So if you make less than $50,000 a year, or your kids, you come from a family making less than $50,000 a year, you can go to community college for free now. And we wanted to do the same thing for childcare, and we just couldn't get that over the finish line. So anyway, we'll talk some more.
Well, we're looking forward to ways that we can help you make that happen. So let's get started. In the film, it covered a lot of different things, from the lack of affordable childcare to toxic stress to the educators' wages. I want each of you to think about how you can share more about which of these issues is most challenging in Clallam County and why. Would anyone like to volunteer to go first? Bonnie.
So yeah, I gave this question a lot of thought, and from a neurosciences standpoint, we're really so acutely aware of the impacts of toxic stress, especially right now, just in the climate with the pandemic and all the racial injustice conversations around the globe. And we also know that what certain children experience as trauma, other children experience as a challenge, and not something that necessarily impacts brain development or health outcomes longer down the road. And the thing that really is the difference in that is the protective factors and the buffers that we can offer for children. And so in Clallam County, one of my main goals in working with the Clallam Resiliency Project and working just with the children that I do, acting in my own sphere of influence, is really working on closing that gap and just meeting children where they are and working to really support their immediate needs by looking at what we know builds resilience. And through the neurosciences, the three things that are researched, things that we know build resilience within people are individual capabilities. So that sense of hope, self-efficacy, helping kids with executive function skills. Attachment and belonging is the second thing. So making sure that every kid has at least one caring and competent person that's there in their life to hold a container of safety for them. And the third thing is a connection to community, faith, spiritual practices that really help people to feel like they are part of something much larger than themselves. And so those are the things that I'm really focusing on, and where I know the Clallam Resiliency Project and many organizations and individuals around town are really working to support that just capacity building for resilience. So I'm passionate about that and really hopeful with all the work that I'm seeing happening in the community.
Thank you. A sense of hope is so important right now, especially. Is there anyone else on the panel that would like to share? Steve?
I'll offer up that the lack of affordable childcare is an enormously community stressing issue. Of course, the pandemic exacerbated it, but in pre-pandemic times, we were waitlisted for over 200 kids in Port Angeles to enter into the club. Our building just isn't big enough for that. So that wait list is still there and it has grown. We have a new club inbound and that will accommodate more kids. And post-COVID, it may move towards a more comprehensive solution to the problem, but the problem is huge.
Go ahead, Mike.
Obviously, the wage issue is of huge concern to those of us at the state. I am curious if I can one panelist ask another panelist a question? I was curious with Anna, as people sign up for training, is the wage, is that a concern? And do you find that an impediment? My point being is that part of our funding package that we were putting together was a significant wage increase. So we ask, I don't think people, I mean, just real quick, we ask a lot of people in our society we ask people to work in care homes and do the kind of work that many of us would never do. And they make less than $15 an hour. And we ask people to work with our kids that, you know, people like me would never, that probably wouldn't be my thing, but we ask them to do it for less than $15 an hour. We as a society, it's shocking how little people make in their avocation. But I'm curious, Anna, has that been an impediment? Because it is something we wanted to raise the wage for both of those career fields, beginning of life, end of life. I don't know that $13.75 an hour, I don't think that's fair, but it makes it difficult to attract. But am I right, Anna? Or
yeah, you're right. You're right on the money there. You know, it does make it extremely hard. You're asking people to do these really tough jobs and to go get educated, right? I mean, that's the important part. Like Bonnie said about all of that neuroscience and understanding all of that, you have to have a workforce that's educated who can respond to those things. And, you know, if you're not going to pay them for that piece, that makes it hard. It makes them hard to keep their why and their passion alive with that. It really affects that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I remember being a young mom and I worked for the Boys and Girls Club at the time, and paying for childcare was more expensive than paying for rent at that time 20 years ago. But it continues to be a huge challenge for families and individuals in our communities. So what are we doing right now to address some of those challenges? Steve, you maybe could speak a little bit more about the expansion of Boys and Girls Club and possibly what is happening with the school year changes and how you guys are coming to raise to that challenge.
Well, I hate to use the term, but it's a flexible landscape right now. We are expanding our physical plant capacity in Port Angeles, but right now our major activity is in feeding. We're doing summer food program at 19 sites in Port Angeles and Squim. So that's got everybody going pretty hard. The status of how schools are going to operate will determine what we are able to do. And right now it's still a moving target. We also need to get clarification on what's going to happen at the federal level for USDA support for what is currently flexibility in the summer food program and the regular food program, child and family food program that we operate during the school year, has constraints on it that if they're left in place will be very limiting for us. If the flexibility that has been granted us this summer is continued, then we'll continue that role as best we can as the school year unfolds. But I can't give you a clear answer because right now we do not have clarity. And until the schools actually stabilize in some form of operation, we'll be flexible.
Anna, do you have anything to add on the work that the college is doing to help with these problems?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have at the college is we have an early achievers grant. And even though it originally got cut from the budget, the group worked really, really, really hard to get it back in. So the grant is for students to fulfill that work at early achiever sites, which is a quality rating system. That they can get their tuition and books paid through this grant, so they can get some of that schooling that they normally wouldn't be able to afford. The other thing that's really nice about that is that usually financial aid becomes, even though they're in the low income bracket, right, that you have to take so many classes at a time, which if you're working full time is very overwhelming. With the early achievers grant, it does allow them to take one class at a time where they don't have those constraints as they would in financial aid. So that's really nice. On a bigger note, the college is really working on a equity 2-year plan that it was a part of this summer to start rolling out of how can the college really engage more than just what's on campus, but in the community too.
Thank you. I'm going to take a part of a question from the chat and direct this at Mike Chapman and see if he can tell us anything he might know about thoughts of universal preschool and the state funding that kind of care for our children.
So again, it is an issue that has been front and center, all of the funding for both childcare and early learning. Universal preschool has been looked at. It is all very, it takes a lot of money. The package we looked at last year would have generated about $1.2 billion for the biennium directly for early childhood learning and childcare, but it wouldn't have been enough to do universal preschool, but was taking the next step. It's no surprise. So a package like that clearly would be a partisan vote. Our friends on the other side of the aisle would never vote for that. And so it got bogged down. We're going to lose some seats. So the idea of passing that kind of package going forward looks more daunting. And it's just the reality of our state tax system. So this bill would have been funded by, and I think I talked a little bit before, would have been funded by a capital gain tax on individuals who would have individuals or hedge funds. It was you would have been taxed on profit above $500,000 per individual or $1 million per couple or business. Not that you sold something for $500,000, but that you literally bought a stock for $100,000 and sold it for $750,000, and then you would have paid a capital gain on that difference between the $500,000 and the gain. It would have generated significant amount of money, not from individuals. The individuals around our state would have generated virtually nothing. It's the hedge funds that operate in Washington state. Most people don't realize we're a hedge fund magnet. Most from California have moved into Washington and a lot in Southwest Washington because we don't tax them. So they can come out of California where they pay. And so we've literally asked, they don't pay anything. They don't even pay a B&O tax because they don't really generate business. activity. They do investments. And so it was directly at hedge funds. And even that bill became just bogged down, and not everyone. And so it's without a dedicated funding source. And pre-COVID, I was encouraged. I think we would have been able to get there this year. Post-COVID, with the way our budget's looking, it's going to be even more daunting. So we'll fight. I believe in it. I supported that package coming out of the finance committee that I serve on. We look at this. We've passed a number of financing measures out of the finance committee, but then it goes to the full measure. Some stuff came off the House floor and then it dies in the Senate, and that's not uncommon. So these are, we have very passionate members in my caucus in the House who are very passionate about this. And they're, someone said, Christy, I think you said it, when you were working at a minimum wage, it was going to cost more. Well, we have legislators, moms in the legislature who will pay more for childcare than they make as a legislator. So there is a mom caucus, and guys like me and Representative Theringer just kind of do what they ask us to. So, but they're very passionate about this, and they're not going to let it go. So I'm not saying it won't happen. It's just inevitably, if we're going to lose a few seats on our side, it's going to tighten things up, and we get no help. It's fine. It's their philosophy that just our friends on the other side of the aisle will never vote for a tax increase of any kind. So, and our economy was growing pre-COVID. So in essence, we did put money into the budget for this cycle out of just the growing economy. Unfortunately, that growing economy went poof in March. And so a lot of revenue that would have been available. Finally, the really good part is, I don't know, my seatmate, Representative Theringer, he chairs the state capital budget. And so Steve, certainly the Boys and Girls Club, because of the access to childcare, and then the William Shore Pool, because he runs an after-school program, and then we've been able to help with those projects. And then Steve was able to, in the capital budget, fund a new facility down south in Grays Harbor. So for those that are looking at facilities, actually the capital budget will be the one budget that won't be looking at budget cuts. The operating budget will be cut, transportation budget's been cut. So that is hope as far as for facilities go and capital investments. Representative Theringer feels like he'll still have a fairly robust package for next year because that is funded differently and it doesn't come from general fund or business tax revenue. Anyway, so I say that for those that may be looking at expansion for facilities, I think we'll have money for facilities going forward. Finally, the package included a significant pay raise and continue to put money into training. One of the things we hear, I think our Commissioner Randy Johnson, I think I see is on the call. One of the things we hear is licensing, trying to streamline the licensing. And I know the YMCA had some challenges. We are working with the governor's office to try to loosen up some of those licensing requirements. Some are a little difficult to understand. Some come out of for good reason. So not long answer, sorry to take so long, but this is pre-COVID. This would have been the #1 issue facing the legislature. I promise you that. We funded basic education. We funded higher education really significantly. This was the last piece. Now we're post-COVID and that changes things a little bit.
So speaking of COVID and post-COVID and pre-COVID, we had a question from our viewers about how we can work with our children, what kind of resources are available during COVID. And I thought Jennifer would be a good one to answer this one for us.
Yes, thank you. I'll share some of the resources that NOLS has available, and then afterwards, if anyone wants to add on, that would be great. So first, we're a library, so we have lots of books. Even though the building isn't physically open to the public, we do have curbside pickup right now, and it's Monday through Friday, 11 to 5 p.m. and on Saturdays, 10 to 2 at all the NOLS locations, except on Saturday, Column Bay is closed. And if you miss browsing books, because I know a lot of families come in and like to browse books, we do have a couple options right now. A grab bag where you would fill out a form on the library's website, and also book match if you have a specific subject that you want some materials and would like assistance from a librarian. They can help match you up. We also have downloadable ebooks and audiobooks and music. So if you want to have a family dance party, those are available on the NOLS website without having to go curbside. We also have story time kits. We have about 45, I think. So each kit is a theme, and it includes books, activities, and a song and rhyme sheet with early literacy tips. Examples of the themes include community helpers, kindness, yoga, feelings, trucks, and superheroes. So it's just like a whole kit that a parent or caregiver and teachers can use. Yeah, so that's a fun one. And then beginning in September, the youth services team will be providing Zoom story times geared towards early learners. And we're hoping with Zoom, it will be more interactive. And once a month, there will be copies of one of the stories that we'll read for parents and caregivers to pick up at NOLS locations for them to keep. And we're hoping this way, parents and caregivers can read along and interact with the book and their child at the same time while the storytime provider is sharing songs and rhymes in that story. We also will be providing early literacy minute videos that will be on the NOLS social media and YouTube. And some of the videos will be songs and rhymes, felt boards, yoga and mindfulness, also including some Spanish. And we have a program called 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten, which is a nationwide program that encourages parents and caregivers to read aloud to their children on a regular basis. The goal is to read 1,000 books before children begin kindergarten to instill key language and vocabulary skills. Pre-COVID, we had paper trackers, but right now we're working on moving it to an online tracking system. So that should be available very soon. So keep an eye out on the NOLS website, which is www.nols.org. And we also have online resources on the NOLS website, including a Stay Home, Stay Safe page, which includes resources and activities for parents to enjoy with their children. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate how much NOLS has adapted to this situation and are making sure they remain relevant in our community. So important. There are a lot of resources that are coming into the chat. So if you can look at the chat, you'll find links to other places. And at the end, we'll also have a list to share. So we have another question related to COVID, and I'm going to direct this at Anna. Seeing how early childhood issues were a challenge prior to COVID, how do you see utilizing early childhood best practices in the new environment?
Yeah, thank you, Christy. So when we think about best practices, that really formulates into do no harm, right? That's our number one mission. And so what I say is that, the person who understands the language owns the debate. So looking at the guidelines that are coming out, you need to really look at it. Is this a rule? Is this a guideline? Or is this a recommendation? And figuring out what that means for you as a provider or parent. We can have a quality, great learning, early learning environment and not have Play-Doh. But what we can't have is teachers that are fearful to interact and make those connections with the children in their care. So, if a child falls down and needs that hug, is that caregiver prepared to give that hug? And so with that, those are the things that people need to look at is what can we do instead of what can't we do anymore? And really how can we still have the connections that we need to have even now with the COVID stuff? So if you can't figure out a way to have those same type of connections or the right connections that you need for you, then and maybe it's not right to be open right now.
That's good advice. We all have to make difficult decisions right now. So a little bit more about COVID and some of the changes that we're having to do because our kids are with us all the time in our homes. How can parents get a break? If they're always with their children and they're trying to limit screen time, but mom and dad are getting frustrated because they have their own meetings or extra work to do at home, what are some ways that we can help kids do things differently during the pandemic? Bonnie, do you have some ideas?
Yeah, so just to speak to all the resources coming in the chat first, thank you so much for sharing those, because again, I feel like there's so much wisdom in this group, and we all are better together. So I just appreciate seeing all of those coming through, and a big thank you to Tracy and Mary who are on the call for putting together the Prevention Works list of just all the different resources. They've worked really hard to bring things together. One of the things that they're working with is an app called Vroom, and it's for specifically children ages 0 to 5, but it's a great resource for parents because it offers not only different developmental tips, but also specific activities that you can do with your children. But when this question came in, I really put my sort of mama heart on that. I think that many of us who are trying to parent and work and navigate all the things, it's can be really hard. It's a real struggle. And so I just came up with some things that really, through my work with the neurosciences and working on resiliency practices, that might be helpful. And just my work with kids. So the first thing is really working on some mindfulness practices, recognizing that self-care right now for people is largely going to look different than it did pre-COVID. It might not look like you're going out and you're getting an hour of time to yourself or something like that. And so just shifting our mindset a little bit about how we're thinking about our self-care right now, and that something is better than nothing, and little bits of self-care throughout the day can be really, really helpful. So when I talk about mindfulness, I'm talking about breathing techniques, and if you have any access to different short, quick meditation apps, 3 deep belly breaths can activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of your nervous system that helps you to calm down. So if you're having what I love to call an extra love moment for yourself or your child, just taking those 3 deep belly breaths can be a really important way to reset. And kids are great at creating different breaths. I do this with my students all the time, and they're the first ones to say, oh, what about an alligator breath or a star breath or whatever it might be. So just remembering to breathe. And I know that that's a really simple thing, but it's so, so powerful. The other thing in the question, it was guided a little bit towards toddlers, but I'd really encourage you to nap if and when you can, if your toddler is napping. I know that sometimes that's not always a feasible thing that you can do if you have other children, but sleep is so, so important. So just to really work on your sleep hygiene. And if you know that your kiddo is going to bed early, to go to sleep at that same time, and then maybe wake up a little bit before they do, just so you're getting in your sleep. The other thing is just really quick self-care. Sometimes I find that just holding a really warm cup of tea can just offer me just like a moment of respite that I think is really, really important. And just bringing into your heart that we're all trying our best, having empathy and kindness for yourself. We're all in vasculating states of being able to give love or needing to receive it, and sometimes from moment to moment. And I know that it can be really, really vulnerable to reach out and ask for help, but just to grant yourself that grace that that's okay, and that there's a community of people who really love and care for you and who want to be here to help. So I always offer that up, that I am a resource, and you can find me in various ways if you Google my name, and I'm happy to help you. The question also asked a little bit about screen time, and Anna, you had such an important point about that yesterday. That would be great to share.
Yeah, so screen time, we all kind of hear about the benefits of books and how important it is, and everything that comes out of the beautifulness of books. But what I pose to people is, if you have a bunch of children's books and they sit on your shelf and that's where they stay, your child doesn't reap the benefits of the book, right? It doesn't happen until you pull that book off that shelf, you're talking about that book with your child, you're making that connection. Well, screen time can be that exact same thing. So if you watch the show with your child, you pause it, ask questions. What do you think is going to happen next? How do you think that made that person feel? What could they have done differently? It can be an educational opportunity too, that sometimes I think we overlook. And, I know this particular question was kind of, talking about, just needing a break. And I get that an hour of screen time is what's recommended and you're trying to stick to that, and that's great. But at the same time, you got to do what you have to do for yourself. And if that means that taking that extra hour and having that screen time for your child, but that's meaning that you're getting the break, and then the rest of the day that you're able to handle situations in a calmer, less stressed out way with your child, that outweighs the benefit or the downfall of having a little bit of extra screen time. So thinking about it in that mental health perspective for yourself as a parent, of letting yourself have that moment where you can rebound and have that stronger connection where you're not so frantic or overreacting to that spilt milk, right? So give yourself a break. It's hard times.
Thank you, Anna. As we're thinking about changes and maybe learning more from screens or going to websites more often versus going to in-person places, can anyone address the importance of being outside for young children, and also any other concerns that we might have about being stunted emotionally or socially during the pandemic?
That question came through, and there's definitely a concern about the social emotional learning growth impacts on children and adults alike. Leading neuroscientists really have been talking about the reality of that, looking like there will be impacts of this pandemic for the next 6 decades. So it feels heavy, and that's why I love to just be in community with people, to know that it's not something we need to take onto our shoulders. So kind of leads back into what I was speaking about the neurosciences and kind of trying to close the gap and really find ways to buffer children as much as possible as we can, to mitigate just the impacts of the pandemic social emotionally. And I think that can happen really largely when we're working within our own sphere of influence and whatever family or community or agency or school that we are in. One thing that we're working on with Clallam Resiliency Project is putting together little tiny resilience videos that we can stream out to anyone that needs them, and they'll just be little nuggets of resilience building practices based off of the work of Community Resilience Initiative in Walla Walla. We're having conversations with the school district about how we can really help to support moving forward social emotional supports and learning for not only teachers, but students and their families, and just really offering ourselves empathy and offering others empathy in these moments, and just trying to be in each other's shoes as much as we can. As far as outdoor stuff, what I find exciting is that I think while there are a lot of barriers to what's happening right now, there are a lot of solutions, and I think a lot of people are seeking out, including myself, outdoor programming. And I know that there's some talk from teachers at the high school of utilizing the school garden as a place that could potentially be a classroom space, and just really bringing in a lot of different diverse methods and thoughts into utilizing the outdoor spaces. I know that that's on the radar of a lot of the teachers in our school district, as kids will need breaks from their masks, and figuring out how to really implement more outdoor time, because as we know, it's so healing to be outside and necessary for kids. So those are my little tidbits about that.
I can add a little bit to the nature aspect. NOLS does have various items to check out that can help families explore nature more. We have a Washington State Pack now, and it includes a pass for the state parks. The Explore Olympic Pack has a pass for the Olympic National Parks, a birding kit, telescopes, walkie-talkies, geocaching, and hiking maps. So there's a lot to explore that you can get from the library as well to help.
Yeah, and I say that, thinking about nature, it's important for children, but it's also important for adults too. So don't forget about the benefits of that. But also, the national parks are great. And I think it is important for children to learn how to conserve nature, which means that when you're on those trails, that you stay on those trails. And that's really important. But finding a place in nature where they can just play with nature and interact with nature is really, really important. And the question had come up in this one of like, how could a community help support that? Is creating a space where children have the ability, where they can dig, they can move those big branches, that they can interact with that nature in a way that they can't do in a national park, because, we're preserving that pristine, environment. And that's important, but we also have to have that opportunity for children to have that access. And then having access to the expensive things like, waterproof boots. When your child is constantly growing, that can be very hard to keep going, because if you wait for a bright sunny day, then when are you going to go outside if you live here, right? So it makes it hard. So making sure that these kids have access and accessibility to those types of materials where they can go out and stay warm is important.
Thank you. There are so many great comments happening over in the chat and so many links to resources. So many people asking how we can work together. And so what do our panelists think about starting more parents helping parents groups, either for caregiving, giving moms a break or parents a break, even sharing learning opportunities?
I'll go ahead and start. So I think that this is great. I think that this has really kind of shown us how much we interact with each other and how much we depend on other people. And so I think that that's really important. I hesitate with, saying, yeah, get a group of families together and that person is going to babysit the kids that day. And the next one, there's wax. So make sure that you understand the licensing rules. But also too, I want you to think about it this way is, are you comfortable giving that person that's going to watch your child a key to your car, key to your house, a credit card that they can just hold on to that's in your name? Are you comfortable allowing that person to have those things? Because if you're not, then why are you entrusting them with your child? And so that's something to think about. And that's why the wax and the licensings are in place, because it's part of that, their background check, they have the right training, they know what to do. And so those are important. And yeah, there can be hurdles to getting licensed and following them, but they're also very valuable to keeping your child safe. So making sure that you're thinking about all of those things while trying to find somebody to watch your kid while you need to work.
So I don't see anyone else thinking about answering that question, but I'm going to take something from the chat. So someone is wondering if there are proven ways for kids to catch back up. If we're worried about learning loss due to the pandemic, what are some things that we can do, especially thinking about people who don't have access to internet or not consistent access to internet, and they can't get online and do some of the online learning as easily as others?
So I think sometimes we tend to overthink things when it comes to children, and we forget that, we don't need the fancy materials or the next best thing to educate our children. We don't need leapfrogs and iPads and all of that. Really, it's about how do people learn? People learn through connection. And so when you have that connection with your child, anything can be a learning moment, right? Having them help you prep dinner is a teachable thing. There's great math, there's great science going on, all of those things. So even if you don't have those resources, it's those everyday activities that can become a beautiful learning opportunities that I think we overlook so many times with children. And hey, then, you're also growing another skill of that they understand what a vegetable looks like pre-cut up and how to do that. So important life skills that I think we have the beautiful opportunity to really invest in with our children, that oftentimes we find ourselves just too busy to do that.
Thank you. So back to our questions that I have here on my list. I really like this question because it's thinking about helpers, and I like to be a helper in everything that I do. So panelists, how can we help others during this time other than washing hands and wearing a mask? How can we teach our children to help others? They're concerned about the teachers at school, the other staff, essential workers, grocery store workers, and everyone else that is working during this scary time. Do we have enough resources?
I can just make a general statement. I think that being kind and giving everyone extra grace and understanding during this time, because everyone has varying levels of stress with the pandemic, and we can't know what everyone is going through, but kindness doesn't cost.
And there are morale boosting items that are small, but they're very meaningful. We have a couple of volunteers that will deliver coffee and spritzers to the club interns and staff. It's not a big thing, but if they know that somebody from outside recognizes the importance of what they're doing and just brings them a treat and says thanks, it's huge.
Thinking about those everyday learning opportunities too, just having your child draw a picture or handwrite a thank you letter and taking it somewhere that you think that they would really like to see someone smile on their face when they got that. So we have had a lot of questions about funding, and so I'm going to kick it back over to our representative to elaborate any more on helping people and how what you're doing in Olympia, and you and your other elected officials are doing in Olympia. What kind of opportunities are there for advocates to help, and what kind of progress is being made?
Not enough progress. I'm not going to be one of those politicians that tells you all the great things we did. We're falling short in this area. Many of us are putting a lot of time and effort, and I explained, and it isn't always about funding. I realize that, but in this case around education, we're limited without significant new funding. And we have a plan. Basic education is fully funded through property tax, a very large property tax increase that our state accepted. And then we really tried to expand access to colleges, and you're going to see the new grant program roll out, and that's funded through basically Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple agreed to a new B&O tax to fund workforce training in our state. And so again, it's rolling out this fall. If you personally make less than $50,000 a year, or you have a child and your family makes less than 50, most of your tuition will be covered. Up to 90,000 is tuition assistance. So those are two areas around this kind of cradle to grave or education. So the last piece was the next, and I know it sounds like a lot, $1.2 billion over 2 years around the state isn't as much as you would think, but we did have a nice package that came really close. It would have passed the House, but the Senate was not going to take it up, so the House kind of backed off. I'm going to fight for that. I'm going to fight for that package. I'm going to fight for wages, increase access to childcare for families who can't afford it, and really work with our business community can come along, and they're also engaged. So your advocacy could be continue to lean on me and Steve Theringer and Senator Vandeweghe, or if we're replaced, which is a possibility, then the new folks that will be representing you in Olympia, you can continue to advocate hard. Without COVID, this would have been the #1 issue that the state really, between that and Medicaid reimbursement rates for our group homes, for our dentists, for our low-income doctors. If there's two areas the state's falling short in, not not around COVID. I think COVID's its own, that may have a shelf life, as it were. But those are the two areas we haven't fully funded. Your clients, the people you serve, fall right smack in the middle. I mean, many of the folks you see, they're also not able to get all the healthcare access and their Medicaid rate. The federal government's cutting back some funds. So those are the challenges we have, and it does take revenue. There are those, I'm not going to just remember, we're a growing state. And when our economy was growing, we were bringing in new revenue. So the revenue isn't just what the legislature adopts as far as a revenue package. All we can do is say, we think in a growing economy, this is how much we're going to generate. This is what we're going to spend. So since March, our economy has not been growing. So the budget we passed in March, a lot of spending has been cut. It's because the revenue is not there. So that's the first order of business, is kind of see where our revenue package is, then see what we can do. Your advocacy, though, if you know folks that are from other legislative districts around the state, other networking, I hope that you all will be able to come down and advocate in January. I think there's a chance we'll be advocating like this still in January. There's a chance that we won't even be in Olympia in January. So we'll be doing all of this, but we'll be here. We'll be working on it. Finally, there's been a task force on this issue all summer that I've been on. And again, I'd be so much more encouraged without COVID. We'd be right there. I know we would do this. I know we would step up. I know we would do. And so I'd love to be more encouraged. We're working hard. I know I'd love to say, yeah, no worries, guys. In January, this is going to go right through the finance committee, and it's going to the floor, and we're going to pass new revenue. I don't know.
Thank you. I remain hopeful that everyone will continue to think of unique solutions to the situations that we're in right now. So what else can all of us do to stay engaged with this issue? After we leave this Zoom meeting today, what can we do beyond just what we've been talking about right now? Prevention Works has created a list of resources to help you as parents and caregivers. You can go to their website. It's been listed several times in the chat, and we'll work on a list to email everyone so that they can see all these resources in one place. At United Way, we like to say that you can give, you can advocate, or you can volunteer. So I'm going to encourage each of you to think about how you could do any one of those three things: give, advocate, or volunteer with one of your local helper organizations, like First Step, or the Y, or the Boys and Girls Club. There's so many that I'm not going to be able to list them all, but the library, what could you do to put a smile on a librarian's face for what they're doing? What could you do with Concerned Citizens in the West End, where they help children and people with special needs? What could you do with Parenting Matters and spreading the word that they put out in their newsletter? What could you do with the people who work for and work with Peninsula College in educating our new early learning educators? What could you do with OLICAP or with the Clallam Resilience Project? There's so many different ways that you could get involved, and we hope that each of you will consider doing that. To close, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to reflect on, as Bonnie says, their own sphere of influence. Keeping in mind the troublesome times that we're in, the uncertainty and stress that we're all going through, what are you most hopeful about in terms of our progress and our future for early learning? Anna, can you go first?
Yeah, so I feel like, we've talked about ACEs, we've talked about resiliency, and we all know how important that stuff is. I think a lot of times we separate it and think of it, well, that's a problem. Mental health issues is a problem for those people. And now, because even out of this pandemic, we're going to have more of it. And with that, I feel like it's going to be the tipping point, to spin this optimistically, which sounds bad, is that when it becomes a bigger need, it gets more attention. And so I feel like this might be the tipping point for children this age, where there is those types of services set in place, that we know when we come back in our school system, that social emotional learning doesn't just happen in the early years and then we drop it off and turn it into social studies. that it's going to be important for part of that catch up and all of that stuff that we devote that time in our school system for that type of learning, that it weighs the same amount as math and science and language arts, because it is, you know, it's not something that you just learn and you're done, but we treat it like that in a lot of our systems where it's you should have mastered that in preschool. And so I feel like that's my hope, is that this changes that and makes that so we have a different way of thinking about our social emotional learning.
Thank you. Mike Chapman, can you go next, please?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the invitation to participate. And number two, thanks for everyone who's works so hard in this field. You know, I'm trying to, you know, I'll try to do my very best to represent you, but you all are the experts. So please, number one, don't hesitate to email me, contact my office if there's something that you need me to know. I'll finish on a more positive note, and I'm not completely I just can't sit here and just tell you it's going to happen. I won't do that. We're going to try our best, but the good news is, like I said, the capital budget should be okay. So if you know of a facility need, like the capital budget's funding a brand new facility in Elma, Washington, which is in the south end of our district in Grace Harbor. So if there are facility needs that you know of, contact Leanne in Representative Theringer's office, or you can contact my assistant. Her name's Annika. She's a Port Angeles high school grad, so she knows this community really well. And we can start putting together our capital budget requests for the district around this issue. These are going to be priority issues going forward for the capital budget as far as for facilities. So on the facility side, there's still opportunity. And like I said, Steve's group is, you know, Boys and Girls Club has benefited from that. Finally, please help me help you. So I'm not the expert, and I have a lot of, you know, I'm serve on a lot of committees and have a lot of things. So please don't hesitate to email me if there's something you want me to read. Just remind me, you know, that we just do that. That would really help. I get a lot, and I get a lot that's not real helpful. So anything you'd want me to understand that makes, and if down the road when we reopen back up, if you need me to swing by to take a look at anything, meet with anybody, I'd be willing to as well. So help me help you in Olympia.
Thanks. You, Mike, for your service. Stephen, can you go next?
Sure. Grounds for hope. I'm hopeful by seeing the strengthening partnerships and connections. My desperately overworked CEO, who was originally supposed to be part of this panel, sits on a bunch of them, and I've had the privilege of sharing some of those sessions with her. We have a local group consisting of the Y, William Shore Pool, Concerned Citizens, and Boys and Girls Clubs, working at appropriate allocation of CARES relief funds. So in a number of vectors, partnerships are strengthening. I'm hopeful based on the creativity that people are bringing to the table in terms of serving kids. If you can imagine a dozen kids arrayed, sitting in banana boxes, being at a drive-in movie inside watching it, you know, the creativity of the staff has been amazing. So even though we're isolated and derailed from our normal patterns of activity, the creativity and the focus and prioritization of child welfare is very encouraging. And I also do have to give a shout out to our legislative delegation, to Mike, to Steve, and to Kevin. Our club wouldn't be happening without the work they do. So thank you.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. There's so many, we would never have had this many people in a room. I don't think everyone would be working. So we're lucky that we're able to do things like this today and connect in different ways. Jennifer, what are you hopeful about?
So I'm hopeful with events like this one that people will continue to advocate for the children in our communities.
Thank you. Bonnie, let's finish off with what you're hopeful for.
Gosh, you know, my focus is always just so much that when we know better, we do better. And I feel like our community is really leaning into that right now. And just leaning into supporting each other. And, you know, I know personally, I'm just constantly seeking to learn and unlearn and just show up in the little ways that I can in the community. And just knowing that all of you have truly beautiful innate gifts within yourself and wisdom that you can bring to the world, just really brings me so much hope, because it really is so easy to just take all of this as such a weight onto our shoulders sometimes. And I'm just so lifted knowing that there are so many caring hearts in our community, and just creative energy happening right now. And it just gives me, it gives me a lot of hope working and being here. So I feel really honored to be here, and so grateful to everyone who worked to organize, and for everyone's time.
Thank you so much. We do have some resources. I think we had planned to have those be shown on the screen, but if we're not able to do that right now, we will definitely be getting back to you with a list of resources. If you can go to the next slide. And there we go. Prevention Works has really done a great job of putting a bunch of different things together, a list that is from birth, like you said, Mike, birth to grave learning for all ages. Next slide. And you can find, you know, activities for childcare, homebound activities, childcare resource provider information, information about becoming a childcare provider. Just everything is there. Next slide. One final thank you to the sponsors and to our panelists. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.